remember growing up, working in the games industry sounds like a dream job. I've always thought my resume felt incomplete without the words boom and blocks. You get to spend all day playing video games, hanging out with other gamers, sell your game and make millions of dollars. Man, the end of this sentence is gonna suck. Yeah, video game companies are just that. Companies. Sure, developers can enjoy the games they make, but at the end of the day, a business needs to be run like a business. And one threat with running a business is that one day, you can't run anymore. Studios close all the time. Sometimes it's for reasons you could see coming from a mile away, other times it comes out of nowhere. It seems even more common nowadays. You'll hear about a studio shutting its doors, firing tons of employees, or getting absorbed no matter how good they're doing. The middle class of game developers is going away. Soon it's going to get to the point you're either AAA or indie, or deep silver, somehow. And when a developer kicks the bucket, they have to leave us something to remember them by. Which is our topic for today, a developer's final game. This is a topic I find endlessly fascinating. You can tell so much about the state of a studio based on the last game to have their logo on it. Maybe they went all out with an original game that acted as a swan song to what made them so special. Maybe it's a yearly scheduled release that shows they were put into the farm system before being taken to the slaughterhouse. Maybe they made a game called Hoyle's Casino. So that's another side of the coin when it comes to a developer's final game, when they go out not with a bang, but with a Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor for DS. That was the fate of Sierra. At one point, the name in adventure games, working on series that revolutionized the genre, like King's Quest and Mystery House. They could also get really horny, but they invented graphics, they can have a boob, or even two. They even published the first Half-Life game for Valve. These guys were huge, but around 2008, the team's parent company, Vivendi Games, would merge with Activision, and they saw no real benefit to keeping Sierra around, and just let them die on the vine before selling off their properties to whoever asked nicely. Hoyle's Casino and Tomb of the Dragon Emperor were the last games developed and published by Sierra respectively, and just don't have a lot to say really. What we're here for are the real disasters. Games you look at and hear, and they were never heard from again. And you say, fair? A company that fits that description to a T is Acclaim. Acclaim is a company whose roots stretch all the way back to the 80s, and have a history that seems to be built on the same bedrock that so many other companies from the same time were. Pissing off Activision, seriously. The company founder, Greg Fishbach, named the company Acclaim just so that if you searched alphabetically, their name would come up before Activision and Accolade, another company made up of former Activision employees who also named their company the way they did to appear before Activision alphabetically. Zero Overflow staying unbeaten, baby. That's the sort of hustle I want to see from the company that doxed people who pirated their porn games. Acclaim is known for a lot of things, like their variety of licensed games, ranging from popular movies like Terminator and Alien to TV shows like Simpsons and South Park. You'd also know them as the publishers of games like Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam, when it was time for those games to come to home consoles like the Super Nintendo and Genesis. This is where they were at their peak, because it could be said that Acclaim was just as big a factor in the success of Mortal Kombat as the blood. Obviously, word of mouth and the gore was gonna carry it far, but Acclaim is behind a lot of the marketing the game got. Mortal Monday has to be one of the most famous video game ad campaigns from the 90s, hyping up Mortal Kombat for both fans of the arcade version and letting those who didn't know what it was why it was gonna be a game changer. And the people we have to thank for that ad campaign were Acclaim, plopping down $10 million of their own money to make it happen. By the time the N64 rolled around, they even started getting their own original franchises they could rely on, like Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. Born from the Valiant comic book series of the same name, which itself is based on a comic book series by Western Publishings and Dell Comics from 1954, but Acclaim bought Valiant Comics, who owned the rights to Turok, in 1994, so it's technically original. Shut up. Turok the Dinosaur Hunter came out at a time where Acclaim needed a hit, and they got exactly what they needed. Over 1 million copies sold, and causing a notable uptick in N64 sales. Stock prices nearly quintupled. They were back in the green. It was going really well, despite the game itself suffering a delay that caused it to miss the original September 1996 deadline and get pushed all the way back to January of 1997. However, the good stories coming out of Turok's development weren't enough to stave off the much worse stories that were mounting in the background. Because no matter how good they did, Acclaim always had a criminal addiction to making terrible games. Sure, on paper, having Spider-Man, Terminator, and WWF games looked fantastic. But looking any deeper than surface level revealed a lot of contempt for the company. The games they published just weren't very good. Sure, they had Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam, but those were just the top of the pile, under which sat dozens of low-quality licensed games. For a while, what LJN was to the NES catalog, Acclaim was to every catalog. Oh, but that was all a hill of beans compared to the real thing eating away at Acclaim: the lawsuits. Acclaim may have been addicted to publishing bad games, but you get an addiction. Acclaim was born with a compulsion to not pay the royalties to licenses they were making games about. Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen were the most high-profile examples of Acclaim failing to pay up when the time was due, which sucks because Sweet 16 License to Drive should have been what saved the company. If that was the only lawsuit, maybe you could manage it. There are only 2 Olsen twins after all. But they were also getting sued by their own investors after they lied about being able to make money in a deal that earned them $21 million, only to lose them far more. Acclaim could see the tide turning against them, and in an attempt to stay relevant, got downright desperate with their attempts to market their games to consumers. Oh, we're talking about all the classics here. Acclaim in the early 2000s was on a whole nother level. These folks were not normal. In short, Acclaim did publicity stunts where you could name your baby Turok for a free Xbox, and put a Shadow Man 2 Second Coming ad on your loved one's tombstone in the same year. I like that. Covers both sides of the spectrum. Either you're coming into the world, or you're going out. Then there was the Gladiator ad that spewed blood into the streets, the whole disaster that was BMX XXX, which thought the reason people rode bikes were for the tits. Burnout 2 was promoted by saying that if you got a traffic ticket on the day the game came out, Acclaim would pay for it. They had to stop that one after the UK government said it promoted reckless driving, but can you blame them? They just wanted more clientele for the Shadow Man promotion. These high-profile flops turned Acclaim from an embarrassment only gamers knew about to one everybody knew about. With all their high-profile failures, lawsuits, and public disdain, it's no wonder that Acclaim would shut down in 2004. Only 1 year after the founder suddenly left the company. Wonder what he knew. This left the company to limp along to one final release: Showdown Legends of Wrestling on PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. Legends of Wrestling is one of the messier rebounds from a breakup you'll ever see. Fuck you, I'm gonna date your dad. So Acclaim was responsible for pretty much every WWF game released from the NES, all the way up until the N64. There they would publish WWF Attitude and Warzone, which are incredibly bad games. Slow, clunky, unintuitive, and looked outdated on a console where every game looked outdated. At the end of the millennium, though, came a shift, as WWF ended their deal with Acclaim and went to THQ for their wrestling games from now on. They would end up shifting developers from Sculpted Software to Aki, who, without exaggeration, are the greatest wrestling game developers of all time. They made the good Def Jam games, okay? That's all you need to know. Without the biggest name in town, Acclaim had to downgrade to the minor league wrestling promotion Extreme Championship Wrestling. There they would make ECW Anarchy Rules and Hardcore Revolution, which were slow, clunky, and unintuitive. In one of Acclaim's many genius business moves, they dumped millions of dollars into ECW to try to keep it open through their financial hardships, so they could keep making games about them. In 2001, though, ECW went out of business and was bought by the WWF. And with them buying the other major American wrestling company at the time, WCW, this left Acclaim with no wrestling companies to make games based off of. What they had in abundance at the time, though, were free agents. Wrestlers who didn't work for the WWF and therefore were free to appear in whatever games they wanted to. And these were some big names too. Bret Hart, Terry Funk, Rob Van Dam, the Road Warriors. They had almost every major unsigned star of wrestling from the 70s and 80s to work with. But this was also a wrestling game made by Acclaim. Yeah, the Legends of Wrestling games are very much the bottom of the barrel when it comes to games about big men hitting each other. Using the Xbox version as a barometer, it got worse with every entry, culminating in the final entry, Showdown. This was set to be the biggest one yet, though, picking up some of the biggest names in wrestling, like Diamond Dallas Page, Sting, and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Learning about the development of this game gives a great insight to how much Acclaim was trying to save itself with one hand while sawing off the other. Justin Withers, the lead designer on Showdown, discussed the conditions behind the game, and went into detail about the situation that spawned it. At the time, Acclaim wanted one thing, and one thing only: a good Metacritic score. With the rise of the site at the time, and how much sway it could have on consumers, getting a good-looking game on the site was a must. 80 or above, that's what they were shooting for. And they promised Justin the world to make it happen. What he got instead was a group of developers who either didn't like wrestling games or didn't want to change anything about the Legends of Wrestling games, and a year to make it. Getting into the game proper, and we have 4 different modes to pick from. There's Quick Match, that lets you play a randomized match, Match Play, where you can set up whatever match you want, the Showdown Challenge, which just amounts to arcade mode with different circuits based on the different decades of wrestling, and the Create a Legends mode, where you get to make your very own wrestler. Oh, fuck yeah. If you're looking to go steady with Showdown Legends of Wrestling, you can also check out the tutorial, which is all narrated by Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret brings his signature zest for life to teaching you how to do top rope moves.
Some icons will pop up as you're playing the game. The purpose of these are to let you know that when certain situations occur during a match, or when you're in certain locations in and around the ring, specific moves are available for you to use.
I mean, if there's anybody I trust to teach me how to play the game, it's the excellence of execution. I mean, come on, he's a seasoned developer.
There it is, right there in front of you the whole time. You're dereferencing a no pointer. Open your eyes.
Ah, yes, the 3 genders: male, female, and legend. The character creator is stupid limited in what you can do. A handful of hairstyles, some face paint, and about 9 different face options mean that your options to make a wrestler that's all your own are pretty much nothing. However, they did put in a clay sculpting minigame where you get to make the most messed up freak imaginable. Oh, God should be taking notes. This right here is the peak of humanity. Give me a wrestling game character creator and I'll thrive anywhere. This is my new Legend of the Ring, Noah's Ark. He has a tattoo of every animal on Earth all over his body. The cougar, the snake, the eagle, the spider. That one. And that's it, that's all the animals on Earth. Wrap that all up in an Acclaim headband and tiger pants, and you're looking at the wrestling industry's next tragic loss. The roster itself, when you can see it, is really impressive for old school wrestling fans. Getting a lot of big names, from Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man, all the way down to picks that would never make it into any other game, like Andy Kaufman, a comedian who had a legendary feud with Jerry the King Lawler in Memphis. Say what you want about the quality of the game itself, which I fully intend to, but one thing that is absolutely undeniable is that the team really loved wrestling. They included so many wrestlers that have no mass appeal but would mean the world to an old school wrestling fan, and included dozens of different costumes for each character, depending on the different era of wrestling. But we're here for one bout in particular, and who better for him to fight than George, the Animal, Steel? The match begins, and oh god, it's so slow, clunky, and unintuitive. Oh, thank god they didn't change the formula. Your controls consist of the face buttons, which you use for strikes, grapples, blocking, and grapples, but a little sassy. It's not that different from many modern control schemes in wrestling games, but it's so wrong in so many little ways. Like, why do you need to press block to stop running? Why does one of the grapple buttons always end in a submission? Why are the grapple buttons even here when striking does this? All Noah can do is ear claps. I'm surprised George even still has a head and it doesn't look like a flounder. The AI in this game is beyond brain dead. Its counters are so few and far between that you're never really in any danger of losing if you just spam attacks. And it's not like it's hard or even satisfying to do. Animations in this game are awkward and don't have any impact at all. They're also bugged to high heaven, as Fritz von Erich walks on air to try and slam me. The whole thing reeks of a lack of polish, which would be fine if this wasn't entry 3 in a series. Again, the company was dying at this point, so it's not like I don't understand, and hearing Justin Withers talk about the conditions it was made in makes me feel, at worst, sympathetic, but it's still not very good. A lot like the presentation, really. The wrestlers have this style that skates between realistic and action figure that looks really ugly. Everything else, from the arenas to the crowds, look like they never got past the N64 days. Though the game does have a nice, varied amount of arenas that are iconic wrestling venues from across the world. The music is all either generic biddle music or cheap covers of their actual theme songs. And the commentary, well, considering one of the commentators was actively battling throat cancer at the time, I think it's fine to cut it some slack. All that's really left to talk about is the last mode, the Showdown Challenge, where you get to wrestle one match after the next on your way to... well, there isn't a championship you're fighting for, or even a reason. You just sort of get put in front of some big guys and get told to have at it. You know, they say the roster is created equal, but you look at Scott Steiner and you look at the rest, and you can see that statement is not true. You see, normally when you go one-on-one with another wrestler, you got a 50-50 chance... oh. It's 30-year-old college student Scott Steiner. Where is the big bad booty daddy? Oh wait, I found him. Sorry guys, I was overreacting. I mean, it doesn't really matter who you pick because it's not like any of them control that differently from one another, and it's still not a very fun game. The best you can bank on is getting some small spark of nostalgia when you see all the wrestlers who are too old to wrestle anymore. Alright, any other modes? How about an obituary? Hey man, you wanna come play some wrestling games? I'd love to, but I'm currently honoring the life and career of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. I really wish there was more I could say about the game, but it's seriously content-starved. The previous Legends of Wrestling game at least had a career mode, but here there is nothing that's gonna keep you playing for more than a single match. It's an unfun, boring slog of a game that feels like it saw how far wrestling games had come since the unplayable jank of Warzone and Attitude, and thought, no. And wouldn't you guess it, it kinda feels like an appropriate note for Acclaim to go out on. A licensed game that banks more on your love for the property rather than any actual quality. It represents so much of their catalog, where being a good and fun game was so far down on the list of priorities, you were in danger of punting it. Showdown Legends of Wrestling is just one of many games like this. It just so happened to be the last one. Except Creed on PC, but that was only published by them in Europe, so it doesn't count because Europe doesn't count. Funny thing with Acclaim is that a lot of their early success came from publishing those original Mortal Kombats. But one thing they didn't do was, make any of them. No, that was all down to Midway, one of the most prolific arcade developers of all time. They were founded all the way back in 1958 as a company that focused on arcade games. Just not arcade video games. Yep, they were focused on shooting galleries, sports games, and pinball until 1969, when the company was purchased by Bally, a pinball and slots company. Seeing as Midway was a lot newer and more malleable than their own company and could be morphed into whatever was needed of them, Midway was set to work on publishing those computer games with the lights and sounds. And wouldn't you know it, Midway managed to stumble over backwards into a gold mine. Midway managed to get the publishing rights to Space Invaders and Pac-Man. The CDC reports don't lie, Pac-Man fever was ravaging the nation. These were some of developers Taito and Namco's biggest hits ever. And Midway was the company that got to publish them in America. They had the best of both worlds and would release hit after hit at almost no development cost, since, well, that wasn't really their job. Because of this, when the video game market crash of 1983 came around, Midway were pretty well insulated and managed to come out none the worse for wear. In fact, they came out of the crash swinging with their first originally developed success, Rampage. After being purchased by fellow pinball manufacturers Williams, more effort was put into developing their own original games, instead of just getting the licenses to pre-existing ones. That gave us games like Smash TV, NBA Jam, and of course, Mortal Kombat. I kinda already went into it in the Acclaim portion, but seriously, overstating the impact of Mortal Kombat is impossible. Before this, every one-on-one fighter was trying to be the next Street Fighter. But suddenly, they were all trying to be the next Mortal Kombat. Heck, even Street Fighter tried being the next Mortal Kombat. This game changed the arcade and fighting game scene forever. And Midway was able to reap most of the benefits. See, the ghost of Acclaim still hasn't left us yet, as their deal to publish Midway's games in the home was cutting into their profits by a lot. Especially after they somehow managed to outfox Midway out of the NBA Jam name. Midway would cut ties with Acclaim following Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 on the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and would now be handling the publishing themselves, while still having arcade smash hits like Killer Instinct. Yeah, they were publishing games that knocked off their own game. They were crazy back then. And their foray into home publishing was going great at first. They had the games everybody wanted. Arcade gems like Mortal Kombat Trilogy and Gauntlet Dark Legacy, while also teaming up with id Software to publish games like Doom 64. The problem came in, though, when they just refused to say no. The number of Midway games published went through the roof during the N64 and PlayStation generation, but that meant the roof had a massive hole in it. BioFreaks, Rampage Through Time, Kurt Warner's Arena Football Unleashed, all of these were big failures. But it's what they were doing to Mortal Kombat that was an even bigger issue. MK4 was a hit or a miss with people who didn't like losing to Sector. Mythologies was an interesting concept, done by a team who had never tried it before, and Special Forces was such a disaster, it permanently fractured the creators of the franchise. So their games had to get bigger and more robust, which also happened to cost tons more money. Games like Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance and Spy Hunter cost a lot, but made it back, while games like Freaky Flyers, Roadkill, and Dr. Muto, which would see similarly inflating costs, would become money sinks. As game development got more and more expensive, companies like Acclaim and Midway couldn't afford to rely on the old method of making dozens of games cheaply and hoping a few of them would make money. Now that's just not feasible. And instead of pulling back and realizing they had a hard cap on what they could produce, Midway instead threw larger and larger amounts of money at proportionately bigger and bigger failures. The best part was, they seemingly just kept bringing woes upon themselves by making games cost way more than they needed to. Hey boss, we've been working on a sequel to our pretty successful reboot of Spy Hunter.
Oh, nice. But it's missing that, Scorpion King vibe.
Boss, check this out, a third-person shooter that uses bullet time.
Oh, now that is impressive. I just watched Face Off, and I think the guy who directed that should direct the video game.
Has he ever done that before?
Fuck you.
Oh, and these were just the games that got released. There was an open-world GTA clone starring Snoop Dogg, seen that? A tirelessly recreated Las Vegas game that cost around $60 million. Midway was burning money without seeing a cent back. From 2005 to 2007, they managed to lose over $200 million. Over a fourth of that on just Welcome to Vegas. And in 2009, the company filed for bankruptcy and were finished, leaving just one more game to be released under their banner, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. Now, how the game got to the state that it's in should be pretty obvious. Midway was leaking blood and, way more importantly, money out of every hole it could. They needed a hit and fast, so decided to make a game to cash in on the ever-present popularity of DC Comics, or as I like to call them, Detective Comics comics. Mix Mortal Kombat with some of the most iconic heroes and villains of all time, and there was no way they could lose. The game was initially supposed to be a much grittier, Gears of War style take on Mortal Kombat, in an alternate universe where Sonya wasn't allowed to wear pants. But when Midway saw just how much no more money they had, they decided to staple DC onto their new game and hope it would be enough to lure people in so they could fail to make Welcome to Vegas for a few more years. Now, I'd love to play this game for you, but forces beyond my comprehension have conspired against me to stop me from playing Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. Their names are Sebastian and Joshua. I bought a copy off of eBay and it didn't work. In fact, it started destroying my Xbox from the inside out. Luckily, I managed to get a copy that worked from, I got it from the store. No, it's not on PlayStation 3, that's a glitch. So, getting into the game and you are just overwhelmed with all the options. You can't release a game like this. So for single player options, you have arcade mode, story mode, the combo challenge, and practice mode. Alright, so I know Midway was doing so bad that they only stayed afloat by making their employees pay to work there, but did the budget cuts really have to start with player versus CPU? That's gotta be one of the most basic fighting game modes you can have, and the closest we get to it in this game is the practice mode. Alright, I'm losing my fucking mind here. You're telling me that this is not only not a feature in any of the Mortal Kombat games before X, this wasn't a feature added in a single NetherRealm or Midway fighting game until Injustice? If you want to learn a matchup against a computer, guess you're just gonna have to go to arcade mode and wait. That one at least has a cute little feature where you can go up against an entirely Mortal Kombat or entirely DC arcade mode tower. Or a mishmash if you want to get both. And what you see is what you get. Fight 8 guys in a row, fight Darkseid or Shao Kahn, then fight their merged form, Dark Kahn. This is the second most robust mode in the game. Getting into our first fight, and the combat is extremely basic. Each character has their list of special moves, they're easy enough to pull off, but the whole thing has this aura about it of sloppiness. Some attacks land that have no business dealing damage when your kicks are just sending dirty looks to the air in front of their knees. The heaviest dose of jank, though, comes from the fact that the game is a 3D fighter, like Tekken or Soul Calibur. And 4 games in, I still don't like the style. I know it was like this for the entire PlayStation 2 era, and I know those games have a special place to a lot of people, but it's not exactly how I like my Mortal Kombat. Give those games one thing though, at least they understand how 3D movement in a fighting game should work. Your natural instinct when playing a 3D fighting game is that up and down are going to let you jump and crouch, but double tapping them's gonna let you step forward or backwards vertically. In Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe though, that's only gonna happen if you're holding down one of the shoulder buttons, which just doesn't feel right at all. On top of movement feeling really weird, you also have a close combat button. With 2Ks, this lets you grab the opponent and do a guessing game, where the offense hits a button, and the defense has to press the same button to dodge it. And if they do, they get a counterattack. This, alongside falling battles and test your mights, both lacking Ks, are meant to make fights more cinematic, but really just dumb them down and take a lot of skill out of the fighting. With so few characters and moves for each character, the game gets its complexity from the stages, which nobody is buying Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe for the architecture. If the struggle ever gets to be too much, you can always use Scorpion's built-in infinite. Try and beat me now, you big bald bitch. Time for a fatality. And stay down. Yeah, if we're talking MKVDC, there's one more letter we gotta talk about, and it's the scarlet one hanging around the game's neck. T. First off, not a K. This is the first and only mainline Mortal Kombat game to ever get a T rating. The franchise that started the ESRB by being so goddamn cool was now rated T for teens. The way they did this was by toning down the fatalities for the MK and DC villains, while giving the DC heroes heroic brutalities that leave the opponent writhing on the ground afterwards. Except for Green Lantern, he has had enough. These run the gambit in terms of how big of a letdown they can be. They're either classic fatalities done worse than ever before, or weak and bloodless. Mortal Kombat's always sold itself on gore and over-the-top violence, so seeing it without it just makes it feel naked. Batman finishes off the opponent by giving them a panic attack. Sub-Zero has the exact same fatality twice. The less said about Kano, the better. Okay, so imagine the fatality ends here. This is so much worse than killing him. Imagine how big the Batmobile's gonna have to be. As soon as you're done with arcade mode, all that's left is story mode. Oh, but what about the combo challenge with 1K? Ah, yeah, I've always wanted to feel inadequate. So the story mode is structured like most future Mortal Kombat story modes, splitting it up into chapters where you play as all the characters. Say what you want about the actual stories of the Mortal Kombat story modes, this structure that NetherRealm used in the later Mortal Kombats and Injustices is genius. How do you get the casual player to try out every character? Make a story mode where that's the whole point. In this story, Mortal Kombat 3 is just wrapping up. Quan Chi and Raiden sealed away Shao Kahn after his failed invasion of Earthrealm, and peace is returning to both Earth and Outrealm. That is, until a disturbance is noticed, and Liu Kang goes to investigate, where he finds Sub-Zero and the two fight. I can highly recommend the Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe story mode to fans of broken records, because I've described every single scenario. One character pops in saying, something funny's going on. Then another character comes in and says, the only funny thing is your face! And then they fight. In all my time playing, there was never an interaction that didn't boil down to somebody just walking in and annoying the other person until they Mortal Kombat. There's also a rage virus going around, which explains why Superman, of all people, isn't trying to talk this out and wants to crush Baraka's skull, but it's so bare bones. It doesn't even do anything interesting with the crossover. Finally, Sub-Zero knows what a car looks like. There's 1 or 2 stages where it feels like the worlds of Mortal Kombat and DC are crossing over, but aside from this one with Darkseid and Shao Kahn's thrones, it honestly does feel like Wonder Woman and Sub-Zero just fell into the same dimension by accident. Speaking of Sub-Zero, maybe stop fucking breathing in Raiden's face, you rude bastard. The biggest flaw, really, is the lack of any real interaction between characters, and I feel like that's kind of down to a mismatching of styles between basic DC Comics and Mortal Kombat. I mean, you take Captain Marvel, you take Shang Tsung, what are they supposed to talk about? Some characters as well can be a lot more unfun to fight than others. Flash seems completely busted in this game with near full-screen frame 1 dashes that stun you, lead into a triple juggle, then combo back to the first part of the string. Oh, but Deathstroke is a whole other can of worms. Someone on the MK team loves Teen Titans. Or maybe hates Teen Titans, and wants Deathstroke to be the most annoying character in every game he's in. I didn't have much motivation to play after this. I was more just bored with the whole thing than anything. It's not offensively bad or incompetently made, it just lacks any interest to keep me around. The most interesting thing with this fairly bog-standard fighting game is that it seems to have predicted the future of not just Mortal Kombat, but what remained of Midway. See, after they went under, most of their assets were bought up by friends to preservationists around the world, Warner Bros. From there, they relocated Ed Boon's fighting game team and named them NetherRealm Studios. Not only would they go on to successfully reboot Mortal Kombat into a new golden age, but also make Injustice, a DC-based fighting game. MK vs. DC was split down the middle, and from the two halves grew two new fighting game franchises. Even more than just the spiritual connections, without the work done on MK vs. DC, there would be no MK9, and that would likely mean there would never be another Mortal Kombat. Lots of character models are ported note for note from this game, like Quan Chi, Kano, and Baraka, while others like Scorpion are modified ever so slightly. Animations for characters like the Flash would be modified for use on characters like Cabal, and even some of the fatalities were straight up lifted. Ever wondered why one of Shang Tsung's fatalities is him turning into a clown? Well, it's just the uncensored version of the Joker's fatality from this game. This game isn't just an extremely noteworthy part of Mortal Kombat's history, it's one of the most important parts too. So much work on this game went on to lay the bedrock for the series' revival that even if the product itself isn't especially good, it still deserves credit as the game that saved Mortal Kombat. Look at it like this: no Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, no 13-0. It was worth it. For keeping the legacy of one of the most important fighting game franchises of all time alive, it's a more than fine enough capstone to Midway's legacy. Except for the Wheelman, but that was only published by them in Europe, so it doesn't count because Europe doesn't count. The final studio to suffer the cold and bitter fate of closure we're talking about today is one I do have a lot of fondness for. In fact, I'm sure that if you went through their catalog, you'd find a handful of games you look back on warmly. And that's because they had an all-but monopoly on childhood. THQ is a company whose history spans all the way back to the NES, in much the same form we'd know it as for the rest of its life. They were founded in April of 1990 as a small company based out of California that specialized in publishing licensed games. At this point, they'd still have to be careful about what they were publishing. The number of games they published in 1993 could fit into one hand. It really wasn't until 1997 that they would start to publish some major games. Not to insult the Mohawk and headphone jack community, which I'm sure 100 comedians just joined to say, "How dare you? I see you, you're not clever." They'd pick up the first of many Disney licenses, their first licensed sports game in NBA Live 98, and most importantly of all, publish WCW vs. NWO Revenge. That means that THQ did play a part in running Acclaim out of the industry, as after this they'd snag the WWF license and publish some of the best wrestling games of all time, like WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy. Wrestling would stay a big part of their business model for a long time, as they partnered with Ukes to create the SmackDown series, which would eventually become SmackDown vs. Raw, securing a major publishing deal with the biggest wrestling company in the world. It was also here that they first teamed up with their most famous developer partners, Volition. This is the company that would go on to make Red Faction and Saints Row. Maybe not the biggest, but some of the most memorable open-world games of the time. In the early 2000s, they'd not only build up a relationship with Sega and publish games like Return of Shinobi and the Sonic Advanced series, but get their most prolific licensing deal with Nickelodeon. THQ and Nickelodeon were inseparable, with dozens of SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, and Jimmy Neutron games coming out of the partnership. This includes the fantastic Battle for Bikini Bottom, the movie game, which is better. They even published the first original Nick property made for video games in Tak and the Power of Juju. Eventually, though, as the decade wore on, it became obvious why the studio would eventually collapse. They took it upon themselves to publish any game that looked at them funny. They're already babies. Why do they need to be superheroes too? Despite publishing a lot of great games in their time, THQ could never escape being seen as a mid-tier developer, B+ at the best of times. They published way too much shovelware and licensed trash to ever escape that title. Even after they started to pivot away from that sort of game, after the well had well and truly dried up. You'd go to the game store and see a hot new release! Published by the same people making the bottom-of-the-shelf garbage. And that sort of association sticks in your mind, whether you realize it or not. Could you see yourself getting as excited hearing a new THQ game is coming out the same way you would for a new Nintendo game coming out? With Nintendo, or any established developer, you've set your expectations already. It's probably gonna be good. With THQ, hearing they're making a new game is a total crapshoot between Red Faction Guerrilla and Big Mother Truckers 2. Their last attempt at sticking around in that kiddie demographic that had served them so well would come in 2010 with the U-Draw game tablet. I am not wasting the chance to talk all about this thing in the middle of a different discussion. All you need to know is that releasing a child's peripheral on the Wii, great idea! Releasing it on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 is a ticket to a $100 million loss and a very solemn trip to the dump. The 2010s, I won't lie, are just kinda sad for THQ. They would start out the decade losing hundreds of millions of dollars, shutting down studios, shuttering franchises like Red Faction, all leading up to a truly sad moment in November. THQ and the Humble Bundle teamed up. THQ essentially came to the gaming public, hat in hand, and explained they were out of money. And they'd let you pay as much as you want for a bundle including 6 different games. And paying just a little over $5 got you Saints Row the Third. It would end up selling over 800,000 bundles, totaling over $5 million. But when you're losing $200 million, it's nothing but a very sweet drop in a bucket, without so much as a hole, but no bottom at all. They couldn't even afford to stay alive until the end of the bundle, and filed for bankruptcy at the end of 2012, with their final game released being Darksiders II. The Darksiders franchise, and you have no idea how many retakes were needed to stop saying Darkstalkers, was THQ's big new property at the start of the 360 and PS3 generation. An epic action RPG that took cues from games like Zelda in order to tell a story of the apocalypse brought about by the Four Horsemen. It had a much bigger sense of scope and grandeur than most of their regular releases. And if this tramp stamp wasn't here, you'd mistake it for a AAA game. The first Darksiders was a hit for THQ and sold over 1 million copies, so they decided to throw their full weight behind Darksiders 2, spending over $60 million to make it happen. Because I guess $60 million is how much it costs to kill a game studio. To this day, if you look up the most expensive games of all time, you'll see Darksiders 2, hanging out, thinking it's on the team. Okay, so Darksiders 2 is special, cause we're gonna have to paint this thing with very broad strokes. Last two games were fighting games, a genre known for its abundance of single-player options. Darksiders II is a full-length Zelda-style action RPG. Don't see this as a full-on overview, rather just a first impressions of a very large game. Maybe it gets really good. Maybe it gets really bad. I don't know. Also, just for the ease of capture, this is going to be the game's 2015 remaster, the Definitive Edition. Oh, fuck you, Voodoo Vince. The plot of Darksiders 2 picks up after Darksiders 1. Wait, was I supposed to play that one first? War, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, has been captured by the Charred Council. They're angry at War for killing all of humanity and want to punish him, which leaves his brother Death to try to save his brother and prove that he's innocent. How's he gonna do that? Resurrect humanity. Guys, I think you forgot what Death does. If that plot sounds simple, trust me, the amount of keywords and lore I had to cut away for brevity is so long. There should really be a game before this to explain all of that. So, Death's journey takes him to the Icy Vale to meet the Keeper of Secrets, Crowfather, in order to transport him to the Tree of Life so he can resurrect humanity. See what I mean? Combat is pretty simple to start out with. You have a basic combo string with X, and a variant attack with Y that changes depending on the sub-weapon you equip. By the first fight, you can grab a hammer that's slow and strings together combos terribly, but a fully charged swing can absolutely obliterate any enemy it hits. Later on, you get stuff like glaives, gauntlets, and axes that can all vary greatly in terms of both combo potential and individual applicability. There can also be variety in certain subsets of weapons depending on which weapon you equip. Like some gauntlets have this shield move if you charge an attack, while others will send out a slicing disc attack. It's an extra level of depth that gets you to think about your playstyle in a deeper way than what weapons have the most stats. But killing people? And not the first thing I think of when I hear Death. No, it's his cat-like reflexes that really put Death on the map. This game has a huge emphasis on running around the environment, with Death able to scamper up walls, run along them, cling to pillars. It's a bit odd at first to watch the Grim Reaper scuttle, but you get used to it after a while. What's harder to get used to is some of the controls associated with it. If we want to talk about the game's biggest problem, even in this early portion that I played, it's bloated to the point of popping, where Death has so many options and controls to remember that you start to forget you even have them. That leads to the game constantly having pop-ups to remind you, hey, you can hold L2 to look behind you while holding onto a pillar to jump backwards. There's also a skill tree, but I played up until level 8 and forgot it existed at level 3. That feature bloat is the most obvious with the equipment system. This is one of those games where it doesn't matter how long frozen the frost demons are, they're bound to have the latest fashion coming out of their nose if you hit them hard enough. Enemies will drop equipment for you as they're defeated, including new pieces of armor, which will update how Death looks, so if you notice Death suddenly swap costumes, it's okay, you didn't run into anybody with the same spectral cloak as you. You also get new weapons, from primary scythes to secondary weapons, and potions to keep you in the fight longer. What's the issue? Ew! You know that World of Warcraft style of progression where you get drip-fed new items that make a number go up by a nominal amount that has zero tangible impact that goes up consistently in a fashion where you never feel a significant increase in power and leaves you feeling at the exact same power level at the beginning of the game all the way to the end? Yeah, this didn't work for Spider-Man. It makes me feel nothing towards getting new items. Sub-weapons maybe, cause those at least change up how I hit things, but when my new boots give me a +8 arcane critical hit damage... Fine. You make it to the Crowfather and ask him if he'd be so kind as to open up a portal for us to the Tree of Life. It turns out this isn't Death's first meeting with the Crowfather, since Death gave him an amulet containing all the souls of the Nephilim that Death had killed. For safekeeping, since he wants to find a way to resurrect them, too. Turns out they're a talky bunch, and they're driving the Crowfather crazy. He wants Death to take back the amulet, and Death says, okay, but how about you do what I tell you to, and then I leave? Crowfather doesn't know when to take a good deal and insists on trying to get rid of it. And to do that, he conjures up an illusion of war for our first boss fight. Okay, making the player character from the last game the first boss in a sequel, I like that a lot. And it's a fun fight. I'm sure it would have a bit more impact if I played the first game, but even still, it's a fast-paced fight with plenty of different moves and reaction times to learn that make it a joy. The combat isn't very deep, at least not to start out with, but that doesn't mean it can't be fun. I actually enjoyed the combat quite a bit, and this fight is a great showcase for that. Now that the Crowfather's been beaten into submission, he opens up the portal. But not before shattering the amulet and driving it into Death's chest to force him to carry around the souls of those he's killed. How will Death manage knowing he killed all those people? Death is hurled into a brand new plane called the Forged Lands, filled with makers who helped create the universe. But they're not as strong as the Charred Council, who may or may not be related to the corruption that's ravaging the land. And do you see why I boiled the plot down to Luigi's Mansion in the beginning? We get to stretch our legs out a bit since we're traveling long distances on horseback, with the chance to fight some enemies on the side to level up, explore small optional dungeons for loot, and talk to new characters to get side missions. Hi, hello, I'm the Pale Rider, embodiment of death. Could you please stop being twice my size? It's embarrassing. I'm feeling inadequate. So the makers can't open the pathway to the tree since their forge doesn't have any fire or water and is slowly dwindling. I know, that doesn't sound even remotely like my problem, but they assure me it is. We're gonna need to go to the temples of fire and water to relight their forge if we want to get through. The temple is based around this cauldron in the center of the main room, which means if we want to get further, then we're gonna need to open it up. Which leads our favorite horsemen up, down, and all around the place to try to find out a way to do that. After plowing through more enemies, we get what makes up around 50% of our time spent in dungeons, rolling a ball. There are so many ball rolling puzzles in this game, it's insane. I'm Death, just kill the door! Luckily though, getting through that gets us to a fight with Garn, this massive rock monster with a drill hand. It's a pretty fun mini-boss that can give you trouble if you haven't been taking care to keep potions handy. We even get a brand new unique weapon from him that we can't use until we're a higher level. Before we go to tackle the water temple though, we can stop by the forge to pick up a few losses against the maker who teaches us new techniques, and also get the gun from our fellow horseman, Strife. Okay, so you made a series based on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and you only got 2 of them right. I think in the hierarchy of bad things, Strife and Fury would just be subsidiaries of War, because Strife seems like a bit of a step down from War, and Fury a step down from that. Really, all 3 of them can just be Death, so this is my proposal to bump it down to just 1 Horseman of the Apocalypse, and to keep it simple, his name will be Kevin. Oh, by the way, I have a gun now. The Water Temple is on the other side of the map, and actually isn't that flooded when we find it. Well, that doesn't seem right, let's help out. The dungeon's all about raising the water level to get to new portions of the stage, since Death is a fantastic swimmer. It's also here we unlock our devil trigger called Reaper Mode. There is not a story reason for it, we just remember it's something we can do mid-punch rush. It's pretty strong, but it's another thing I found myself forgetting I have pretty often. After more ball rolling than I care to show, we get the first half of the dungeon flooded and can now swim to the second half, where we run into these huge brood nests filled with bugs. They're super easy to kill with gunfire, but it's around here that I realized that the game really didn't care about combos. There's no grading system, no benefit for long combos. It removes the need to experiment and learn more of your kit and how it interacts with itself. The second leg ends out with this big bad beetle boss who offers us another fun fight. It's a plenty neat charge and dodge kind of boss, simple but a nice capstone. Now with the water and the fire flowing again, the makers can open the forge and craft us a key to continue our journey, which I can honestly recommend. I have my complaints. Obviously, I spent as much time whining as I did hacking and/or slashing, but even with my problems, I found the game to be fun. What some see as feature bloat, others can see as a lot of mechanical depth that sets it apart from other hack and slashes that are more unga bunga beatdown. It's a beefy game with a lot of love put into it, alongside a healthy amount of jank, which kinda sums up THQ as a whole. A studio that could produce some high-quality, fun titles, while still never quite being able to shake off the jank that the studio was known for before it died. Except for Wheel of Fortune on Wii U, which doesn't count because the Wii U doesn't count. Speak of the devil, is THQ dead? Yes. Is their body still buried? And that's where the case gets disturbing. So THQ did file for bankruptcy on December 29th, 2012. But you may have noticed that the THQ name is still on new game releases. The new Destroy All Humans remakes, AEW Fight Forever, SpongeBob and the Cosmic Shake, so what gives? Well, initially the assets for a lot of their properties, including the name of the company, were snapped up by Nordic Games, who later rebranded as THQ Nordic. All's right so far, skin suits fitting nice. Now watch it get weird. So Nordic Games created a spin-off holdings firm called Nordic Game Licensing AB, though it would eventually get renamed to Embracer Group. Yes, you have noticed the scary music started now. So there's a fair chance you might know about Embracer Group, but if you don't, get ready, cause the talk of the Grim Reaper doesn't end with Darksiders II. Embracer Group currently owns THQ Nordic, which not only has Destroy All Humans, Darksiders, and the licenses to the games mentioned before, but also has several developers working under them. Black Forest, Purple Lamp, Gunfire. That all makes sense. They also own PlayOn, which is the parent company to Deep Silver. This gives them a stranglehold on most terrible games published nowadays, but it also puts them in ownership of properties like Dead Island, Homefront, Metro, Red Faction, Shadow Warrior. Oh, what's that? You think Shadow Warrior is owned by 3D Realms? Well, you're right, because it is. And guess who owns 3D Realms now? That's right, Saber Interactive, which Embracer Group owns. That means they also own a company like Aspyr, which has done the modern re-releases of Star Wars games, like those KOTOR games that are never coming out, and those Battlefront games that should have never come out. Did I mention they also own Coffee Stain? Yeah, those people that made Goat Simulator. Very funny, right? Deep Rock Galactic, Valheim, Westport Independent. Don't worry though, the laugh riot's coming, as next they announced a $100 million purchase of a secret developer who would be folded into Coffee Stain. You're allowed to play coy with a multi-million-dollar purchase? By the way, that company that was worth $100 million, that's 2 zeros by the way, 100 million, was Shortcake AB. Who are they? This has been played over 8 billion times, has 60,000 active users, and was worth $100 million. Let's keep the horror show going. It ain't over yet. They bought Gearbox. Yeah, the company behind Borderlands and Bulletstorm is now owned by the Welcome to Bloxburg's guys. Ain't learning awful. They're also now the owners of Risk of Rain, and that's gone so well. And guess what? Square Enix gets a piece of the pie too. Somehow being the Balan Wonderworld publishers wasn't embarrassing enough for them. As in a bid to capitalize on the NFT market, they sold Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal to Embracer Group. That gives them Tomb Raider, Thief, and Deus Ex. A whole load of games, now all owned by one company. But why stop at video games? For some reason, they bought Dark Horse Comics, which, f***ing cool, but they also bought Asmodee. That's a board game company that makes games like Ticket to Ride and Catan. This cost them... You know what? No, guess. I want you to think up a number in your head right now. How much do you think the people who make Ticket to Ride are worth? Are you ready? $3 billion! You may have noticed that wasn't an M, that was a B. Oh, but it gets worse, because they recently got rid of Asmodee, but not before saddling them with $900 million in their debt. They bought a company just to run a company out of business. They also bought Free Mode, which not only gives them limited run games, but also Middle-earth Enterprises. This gives them the video game rights to make Lord of the Rings games, which is the reason Gollum was made. You had no idea he was gonna show up. What has all this headhunting netted them? $2 billion in debt. You know, individually, all of these developers had their own problems, right? How about you take them all on at once and see what happens? As a result of the staggering debt they're in, this resulted in the company firing hundreds of employees, closing in on quadruple digits. This has also led to the closure of studios like Campfire Cabal, who made the Expedition games, Volition, who made Saints Row, and Free Radical, who made Time Splitters. The developers behind the new Alone in the Dark game closed only a few weeks after the game launched. These studios could probably make up their own discussion going over their untimely demises and the games they left behind at the hands of Embracer Group, a company that seems dead set on becoming the biggest middle-of-the-road developer of all time. They have all the studios, but no unity among them. They're all still doing their own thing, working with older publishers in the case of Gearbox, which really begs the question what the end goal of Embracer Group even is. Alright, we've collected every single mid-tier developer in the industry. Now what? I said that the middle class of game developers is going away, and apparently they were all going inside of Embracer Group, who wants all of that for some reason. Right now, the only thing it seems good for is giving fuel to this exact type of discussion, running developers out of the industry by letting them sit there, collecting dust, until they get shut down for being a liability that they never needed to take on.